Hello and welcome. I'm Mina Farag. I'm one of the doctors working in the UK, and I'm doing this video as a part of a series of videos I'm planning to arrange to make the life easier for new doctors who come and start working in the UK. So this video is about News Corps. So I'm doing it because I noticed a lot of IMGs who come to work in the UK, especially senior doctors, believe it or not, because junior doctors get taught what's news score in their preparation for FLAP exam. But senior doctors are usually, when they start working here, they are not familiar what's news score. So to familiarize everyone about it. And in this video as well, I will try to explain the idea and its importance. And this video is just to give you a general idea. If you want a deeper idea, you can do a learning module, and I will guide you to a couple of websites when I finish. So what's NEWS? NEWS is an acronym for the National Early Warning Signs. It's a system that was developed by the Royal College of Physicians in 2012 in response to a national inquiries in patient deaths in hospital. And it's basically a tool um, for early detection of patients who are deteriorating. It's a system to measure the physiological parameters, to put the physiological parameters of the patient in numbers. It was updated in 2017 to what's called News 2. So this is how they number the physiological parameter of the patients as per, as I say, the Royal College of Physicians. It's very easy and self-explanatory. So 7 parameters: respiratory rate. Before I start, the idea is very simple. The idea is, if your number is higher, you are sicker. The more sick you are, the higher the number you will have. So if your respiratory rate is normal, between 12 and 20, you are scoring at 0. If your respiratory rate is abnormally high or abnormally low, you are scoring on a higher number. And then the saturations. There is 2 scales for saturations. So if you are a patient who is not a CO2 retainer, you don't have severe COPD or asthma, you are scoring at, if your sats are over or equal to 96, you are scoring at 0. But they noticed that there is a lot of problems about prescribing oxygen. So to make it easier for everyone, if you have a patient who is known or has a susceptibility to be a CO2 retainer, the problem with that is if you overdose your patient with oxygen, he will retain more and more CO2 and he will lose the drive to breathe, basically. So that decision should be usually taken by a senior clinician, that this patient should be on a scale 2, and it is usually a patient with exacerbation of COPD or a patient with severe COPD, that we will say if his SATs are 88 to 92, this patient should be using at 0. We are using scale 2 for this patient, so that when the nurses do their news score, if he is using at 89 on air and everything else is fine, he's using at 0. So 2 scales for saturations. And then if you are using oxygen to maintain your SATs, you are scoring at 0. You are scoring at 2. If you are not using oxygen, you are scoring at 0. And then systolic blood pressure, same idea, these are the numbers. Pulse, same idea, these are the numbers. Consciousness, if you are confused or if you are responding only to voice or pressure, or if you are unresponsive at all, you are scoring at 3. Temperature, the same idea. Okay, sorry, I've just noticed that my image, I'm gonna move my image 1 second. That was not very clever from me. Here we go. Ooh. Here we go. So that's it. This is how you score your consciousness, and this is how you score the temperature. Right, next slide. So now you understand how does the chart work. Now I'm gonna put my face back down again. So why do we use it? What is the importance of it? First of all, for early detection of sick patients, I'm going to speak about specific applications in next slide. So when the nurses are doing the news round to see the patient news score, it will be very easy for them to pick who is more sick and who is not. Objectively, you'll speak to their clinicians, you'll speak to the doctor and say, I have a patient who's using at 5, can you come and see him please? Or when the triage nurse is triaging patients in A&E, she will go and see to the A&E doctor, I have a patient who have just come, we have other patients who have been waiting for hours to be seen, but this patient is sick, he's using at 6, he has to be seen now. So it's a way to prioritize, a way to detect sick patients, and a way to follow up their progress as well. This patient, when he came to hospital, he was using at that number at 8, and now he's only using at 4, so he is improving. And it's a way for clinicians to speak the same language. As I said, when the nurse is going to the doctor to explain something to him, she is telling him, I have a patient who is using at that number. When you are handing over to another clinician in a different hospital, it's a way to paint a clinical picture for him, saying, I have this patient who is very sick, he needs to come to you for an emergency operation, he's currently using at so and so, I'm gonna call a blue light ambulance for him because he has to arrive in your hospital as soon as possible. So it's an easy way to paint a clinical picture, and an accurate one. So applications, first of all, emergency calls, either an ambulance coming to the hospital or a nurse in the ward calling the doctor. So I am a paramedic, I have a very sick patient who is using at 9. So before I go to hospital, what do? I call the hospital saying, I'm coming with a patient and using at 9, I think he's got COPD, that is his parameters, and my ETA, my estimated time of arrival is 8 minutes. So that doctors in A&E in resus or in the acute medical unit in resus are preparing themselves, making sure all the equipment is ready, and all the expertise that they will need to deal with this patient are around, and they will be standing in resus waiting for the patient to come, and they will implement their plan or start assessing the patient according to the ALS protocol, blah 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 blah, when the patient arrives. So for doctors in A&E or in acute medical units to understand or to know what's coming through the door. In the ward, if a patient is deteriorating, a patient who suddenly developed sepsis, urosepsis, chest sepsis, and he was using a 2 this morning because of a bit of oxygen, and that's it. And then suddenly the nurses are doing the ward round and they found that he's using at 7. So different hospitals have different policies, but the general idea is there will be a form of emergency call or fast bleep to a certain number of clinicians to come and attend that patient as soon as possible. For instance, there might be a policy in one hospital that if the patient is using at 7, do an emergency call or a news call or whatever it's called in this hospital. And so a certain number of clinicians, their bleeps will go off fast bleep in the same moment, saying go to that ward, to that bed number, and attend that patient. So usually a clinical outreach nurse, a medical registrar, and medical juniors, SSOs, and F1s, and everyone will be around the patient in a few minutes, 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. So it's a way to escalate very quickly with an objective tool to say that this patient is sick, come now. So that's it. And for nurse concerns, it doesn't have to be an emergency calls and a big number of clinicians around. It might just be a concern. I'm calling because my patient is using at 5. Can you please come and see him? If he's using at 7, I'm going to do an emergency call, or 6, or whatever the hospital policy is, whatever the new guidelines is. But this patient is only using at 4 and he was completely fine this morning. He was using at 0. Can you please come and see him? And in handovers, as I have just said, it's a very useful way to paint a clinical picture. And usually, if you forget to say what's the news score, you'll find the other clinician on the other side of the call. He will say, "So, what was the news score?" And for documentation is very important in the UK. We might do another video about the importance of documentation. But I never see any patient, and most of the clinicians are the same, without writing what's his news score, because this is a very quick way of describing what's happening with the patient. If the patient is using at 0, then that's right. You're just saying that this patient is okay, he's using at 0, he's good to go, he's medically safe for discharge. There's not the only thing. There's not the only way you will decide the patient it's definitely fit for discharge or not. But I say, what I mean is, it's a very useful way when you document in any or in the wards or in your usual order round in the post take order round to say what is the news score now, so that you can easily explain in your documentation without writing loads of numbers what is wrong with the patient. Electronic charts. Oh yeah, and some hospitals they put the user scores on the system, on an electronic system on the hospital computers. So for instance, you have seen a patient who in this ward in the other side of the hospital who is septic, and you have given him antibiotics, you have given him fluids, you have done the sepsis 6 and everything, and in 1 hour or a couple of hours you want to follow up, you want to see what's happening with him before going and attending him again. So you can just open up the system, see what's happening. He was using at 8 when you saw him, or when the whole team have seen him, and now he's using at 5. He's improving. So it's a very useful way to follow patients up. So as I said, this was a very crude and general idea about news score. If you want to have specific information, and on I think on the second website, on this one, you can have a formal module for training in news too. And this website is very useful as well. All right, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please give me